Welcome to the third session of Land, Sea and Sky, the Archaeology of Coasts and Islands, a National Monument Service online conference in partnership with the OPW and organised by Archaeology Ireland. We begin this session in the exciting world of piracy on the Munster coast. Connie Kelleher is an archaeologist with the National Monument Service's Underwater Archaeology Unit in the Department of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht, and is also visiting lecturer at the Department of Archaeology in University College Cork. Connie has recently published The Alliance of Pirates, Ireland and Atlantic Piracy in the early 17th century. And this is the subject of her presentation today: Island Worlds and Silent Worlds, the Cultural Landscape of Archipelagos and Amphibious Piracy. The 17th century was the heyday of piracy along the southwest coast of Munster, and with connections extending across the Atlantic to places like Newfoundland and northwest Africa. A chart dating to 1612 illustrates the pirates' harbours of West Cork and the archipelago of Roaringwater Bay, but identifying archaeological markers for their activity is quite difficult. Certain sites, however, are providing insight into the use of remote coastal areas, both shorelines and islands, and the cultural sculpting of those places to suit the needs of such users, throwing new light on activities that depended on silence and secrecy for success. The evidence includes rock-cut steps and platforms, sea caves, careening places, names and place names, as well as certain shipwreck sites. Many of these sites provided the literal link between land and sea. The archaeological identification and recording of these coastal access points and submerged sites is therefore critical before time and tide remove them forever, particularly when we consider the threat from climate change and other cultural impacts.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be able to contribute to the conference, and I'd very much like to thank the organisers for inviting me to do so. Today, and in keeping with the conference theme, I'll be looking at a specific area of the southwest coast of Ireland in particular, and at a particular point in time, the early 17th century. And within that, I'll be looking at a specific activity that was taking place down there, piracy. I suppose when considering the maritime interconnections in any area at any given time, if you think the reason behind the use of such landscapes or seascapes or indeed islandscapes, it can be very much down to a matter of perspective, whether you're looking seaward from the land towards the sea, or whether you're looking landward from the sea towards the mainland or towards other types of land. And they include islands, and islands themselves that often lie in between are afforded both perspectives. So it's very much a concept of how people viewed this type of landscape and used the type of landscape in any given period. The time in question that my study focused on is the southwest coast of Munster, particularly around the Roaringwater Bay area and its archipelago of islands, in the early part of the 17th century, roughly the first quarter of the 17th century, and really looking for the cultural evidence within that landscape and seascape. And here you can see the general area. The specific area I was looking at was from Castlehaven around to Crookhaven, but also touching on different harbours, including all the way up to Broadhaven Bay and Mayo. And the detail here on the other maps on the right show these particular harbours, and in the Crookhaven area, Lemcon, which is west of Schull, which was formed part of one of the main pirate bases and the hub of the activity. Of central use to the study as well was the 1612 Dutch chart. It's a sea chart that mapped the southwest coast of Ireland, and it forms part of a lee chart, or a book of sailing directions, commissioned by the Dutch States General, really to guide their ships around the coast of Ireland and to inform them on the harbours and the landscape at that time. Here you can see it shows a rugged coastline with a multitude of the islands and havens and inlets that are really the focal point of Roaringwater Bay. There was another specific reason too, however, for the compilation of the lee chart, and the map of the southwest in particular. And that was, as stated in the document, to rid the harbours there of pirates, or as referred to in the document twice, the Roof Haven or the pirate harbours of or off Cape Clear. So the Dutch were very much looking to target the pirate bases in the southwest at that time, because such was the impact on the Dutch shipping and the Dutch trade by the pirates that they needed to actually physically do something about that. So the chart and the Lee chart itself is tied into that whole endeavour by the Dutch to rid the southwest coast of Ireland and the North Atlantic of this pirate threat. Just to give a background to what was going on at the time, there was an explosion in piracy in the first quarter of the 17th century for a variety of reasons. And put very simply, it very much tied into the process of plantation at the time. This was really a period of transition and change. We saw the death of Queen Elizabeth I, and then the joining of the crowns under James I, who was James VI of Scotland. A change from Tudor rule to Stuart rule, and with the ending of the 9 Years' War also, we saw the fall of the Gaelic order. So this is very much the completion of the Munster plantation and that whole change and transition, and it's within that context that this particular piracy of the time takes place. And it's also a transition between privateering wars, or privately commissioned ships that augmented Elizabeth's naval ships, to a war with piracy, because King James now outlawed privateering as well. So these legitimate mariners suddenly found themselves out of work and classed as pirates. So this was why there was such a huge explosion of piracy at that stage. It's also a change in focus from under Elizabeth, what was an expansion of empire through maritime exploration, through her raiding and her piracy and her privateers, to now under James being an expansion of empire through land acquisition and settlements. Colonisation came to the fore, and also colonisation through trade agreements and plantation, as we see in Munster, but also elsewhere across the Atlantic to the New World in places like Virginia. And again, it's what I would call a change from sea dogs, which were Elizabeth's privateers were known as, to groundhogs, which was a focus on settlement and colonisation. There was also the opening up of the New World and the East and West Indies and the spice trade. So this was very much the opening up of the maritime world, and the maritime empires of Europe were vying for part of this maritime trade, and looking really to undermine the hold that the Iberian powers had on maritime trade at that stage. So we saw a huge explosion of ships, an expansion of trade, and different types of ships and changes in ship design to accommodate these now huge cargoes and exotic goods that were started to come back to Europe. I was looking for, and have been looking for, and continue to look for, the cultural evidence for piracy in Munster at that time, and really looking to match the historical evidence in the sources with the cultural material and archaeology on the ground. Really looking to the concept of a pirate landscape, or as is suggested in the sources, but looking to identify the concept of a landscape that was conducive to piracy, and looking for cultural markers within that landscape. The piracy of the time, which I have termed the alliance of pirates, because it was really the coming together of an allied force of men, both legitimate prior to being outlawed as privateers and becoming pirates, and with traditional pirates. So coming together of these men with no other recourse really under James but to turn to piracy if they wanted to continue their life at sea, which is for many of them all they knew. And really joining forces to continue to trade, albeit now illegitimately and illicitly. They did retain some semblance of order. They retained a hierarchy of piracy, where they elected leaders, had the Admiral Richard Bishop, Vice Admiral Peter Easton, and Rear Admiral Thomas Frank. So they retained the sense of almost an organisational setup within the ranks of the pirate fleets. And this really went towards the fact that a lot of these pirates had been legitimate mariners in their day. They also had an unwritten code of practice where they only targeted the common enemy of the crown, which was primarily the Iberian powers. So again, the sense of honour in unhonourable times. From the 72 or so pirate captains that I've been able to identify, along with some of their ships and individual members of the crew, it gives a sense of the sheer force that was there and the sheer numbers of men and ships that were involved in this piracy. So quite a formidable force of pirates that came into being as a consequence of the changes that took place under James. Many of these men settled, they brought their families and operated out of the southwest coast of Munster, while others chose to work legitimately at times in industry like the fishing industry in southwest Munster, and others chose to continue to going overseas. So it was very much individuals within an alliance of pirates. We know this from varied sources. The High Court of Admiralty, for instance, in the National Archives, as well as other state papers and logs of certain ships. But one of the main sources is that of Sir Henry Mannering's discourse on piracy. He himself was an ex-pirate, part of the alliance. He was parted in 1616 and knighted in 1618. So it was really his way of presenting to the king a discourse on how to understand the piracy of the time. It's in 5 chapters and it explains the operations of the pirates and puts forward suggestions on how to suppress the pirates and the piracy. It informs on movements of the pirates in Ireland and elsewhere, such as in the Mediterranean. Informs on the seasonality of the pirates and what they did during different seasons. And on resources, here is an excerpt from Henry Mannering's published accounts by the Naval Society, Record Society. And it, for instance, says that in the Greek islands, they have good quarter and a great store of hogs. So they were able to get sources for meat there. And again, in the Gulf of Tunis, in Porto Ferrain, there are good watering places on the islands, and it was a good place to careen or to clean your ships. So a very important source for the piracy and the pirates at that time. In West Cork then, the main pirate bases there were Crookhaven, Baltimore, and the Skull area, Lemcon, as I mentioned previously, became the hubs of their activity, where they were able to find alliances with those on land and build up their trade in pirated goods. And this again is borne out in the sources, particularly by the Lord Deputy, Sir Arthur Chichester, who stated that though all of them, that is the harbours in Munster, be very commodious and safe for pirates to come into, yet Baltimore is most frequented by them. So Baltimore seems to have been the primary base, official base, in the sense of they were using it to meet the officials, and their unofficial base was very much Lemcon in farther west, past Skull. But these weren't their only bases. They had bases across the Atlantic as well, in northwest Africa, in what was called Marmora at the time, a free port outside the control of the Ottoman Turks, so they could trade there freely, and also in Harbour Grace and Ferryland in Newfoundland, which was a lucrative fishing grounds on the Grand Banks, and the pirates could find a good supply of men willing to join their crews out there. They were also afforded a non-stop non-seasonal base. If they wished to, they could stop off there if the seasons were bad in either Munster or in North Africa. So it was very much an all-weather port, and it's like Southwest Ireland, its remoteness afforded security. So then when you join these locations together, you see within the North Atlantic that it really presented a pirate hunting grounds between these main bases, where the Alliance could intercept homeward and outward bound ships from Europe to the New World to the Straits or into the Mediterranean Sea. So very much a strategic location and locating of pirate bases at that stage by the Alliance and members of the Alliance themselves. The cultural evidence for these then certainly we have recorded monuments associated with officials that were colluding with the pirates, and this is really where the evidence stands up. In Lemcon, for instance, we have Sir William Hull's house. The remnants of that, one battery tower is all that remains from what is recorded as his fortified house and castle within his domain. He was the Vice Admiral there, Deputy Vice Admiral for West Cork, and he was very much a linchpin within the whole pirate operations. And Thomas Crook, who came in and acquired the castle, Unishape Castle, which was the seat of the O'Driscolls, the main headquarters of the O'Driscolls in Baltimore and in West Cork. And he was there truly as an undertaker under the Munster plantation from about 1605 onwards, and was from 1608 very much suspected of dealing with the pirates. And he was very much hand and fist with the pirates as well. So these official control of the harbours meant that deeds by pirates and smugglers could go unrecorded, because the resident officials were very much part of that pirate operation. And it was certainly an operation, and it was a business, and we can glean how much of a wealth was in place through cargoes coming in and supplies being given locally to the pirates through the sources. And here's just one list of goods that came into Castle Park, which is now Jamesport in Kinsale, and stored there under the watchful eye of Henry Skipwith. He again was the Vice Admiral stationed there and in command of Castle Park. So these official sites certainly facilitated in what became a symbiotic relationship between those on land. And again, these were noted in the sources as land pirates, and those who came in, the pirates themselves, as sea sharkers. So it was known by the High Court of Admiralty in London and by the Crown that this symbiotic relationship was, and colluders were in place that really facilitated the business of piracy. But because of the remoteness of where this was taking place, there was little they could do about it. It was a multicultural business, certainly, with members of the crew not just being dominated, and members of the alliance not just being dominated by English pirates, but also others, French, Irish, renegade Dutch, Flemish, and also as far afield as North Africa. So a multicultural business in what, again, Roger Middleton, when he wrote in 1611 to the Earl of Salisbury, noted was that in Munster, that which passeth here are reels of 8, Barbary ducats, and dollars, and it is thought that some treasure is buried on land by these pirates. So again, that statement alone harks back to our kind of archetypal view of pirates, with our buried their treasure on land. So perhaps sometimes fact may be stranger than fiction. But what was really the hub of the business was the luxury and exotic goods that were being brought into southwest Munster at that stage. Goods that normally local people would not have access to, and therefore the pirate activity afforded them that access. But also in return, this reciprocal trade in goods, where the local populace willingly supplied goods like beef or hides or beer or other goods like that to the pirates to revictual their ships when they were going off pirating. But the pirates in turn paid 2 or 3 times the market price for these goods. So it was very much a mutual enterprise for all involved, and mutually beneficial to all those involved. Looking at Roaringwater Bay itself, very much an archipelago. Here's a list of some of the islands. The main islands, there are smaller ones that I haven't put on the list, but it gives you the idea and the impression of the sheer volume of islands within this very small area of the southwest coast. So therefore, very much an archipelago that was a maritime kind of a focal point for the pirates and their use of the islands. And there was certainly sources reveal much about the interconnectivity and interactivity on the islands by the pirates. As an example, in 1610, for instance, pirate Captain Thompson was asked by Thomas Crook in Baltimore to serve on jury duty on Sherkin Island, for instance. We know too that pirate Roger Salter, who came in about 1609, was living on Ringaroga Island, and when he was pardoned, he remained there and worked legitimately in the area. And several of the alliance lived on Long Island. Here you see it represented from a detail of the 1612 Dutch map. and they lived there and worked there. And even though archaeologically we have only 2 monuments recorded on the island, one being a stone pair dating to the prehistoric period, the map would suggest that there was far more and more expansive settlement there, as indicated by these houses represented, and also potential industrial buildings. So again, the charts like this are hugely valuable to archaeology because they can give insights into the cultural landscape of the time and the potential for finding evidence for that cultural landscape that has no upstanding remains now on the ground. And considering these islands, the study of such islands and archipelagos has been the focus of other studies elsewhere. Certainly Galvin in 1999 in his Patterns of Pillage looked at the whole concept of islands. And so the earlier study by Semple, a very much a seminal piece on the pirate coast of the Mediterranean, again looked at the concept of islands as staging posts or as choke points within islandscapes, strategic islandscapes. The concept that islands could provide ideal locations, for instance, to avail of strategic staging areas or narrows between islands and headlands where passing ships could be more easily intercepted by the pirates, or also as safe havens where shallower drafted ships could navigate through these island spaces and narrows, whereby larger royal ships or king ships couldn't follow. So they afforded escape when needed and refuge when that was needed as well. And again, this is borne out in the sources when, for instance, the Lord High Admiral, the Earl of Nottingham, wrote in 1608 that the pirates in Munster were more than capable of outmanoeuvring the 2 or 3 Royal Naval vessels sent to patrol the coast of Ireland each year. So again, these coastal landscape and islandscapes in the archipelagos like Roaringwater Bay afforded this type of use by the pirates. So it was very much conducive to the use by pirates at that time. Ships and mariners, both legitimate and non-legitimate, all required connections between land and sea if they were to sail successfully, because very rudimentary needs was that things like you needed to clean your ship, so you had to come ashore to do that because you couldn't do it on the open water. So certain sites were required, and certain landscapes or features in the landscapes were required to do so. So the natural landscape was very much utilised when it could be. Careening sites are very much indicative of this, where natural sloping rocks could be used as careening sites. And here one is located in Baltimore, brought to my attention by locals who knew of it, in the Cove area. And these are very rare sites globally because they haven't been identified. And a lot of the time they're overlooked, or they may not retain specific features that inform on them being sites that have been used for activities such as careening or cleaning ships. But certainly we know from the sources that sites like this, there was one in the Cove and one over within the harbour of Sherkin as well, that were noted as useful careening sites. So again, these sites are only being revealed when you start looking really into the manipulation of the natural landscape in these remote areas. So where to land goods? Certainly you couldn't be a pirate without being able to land goods and tying in with your kind of sister activity of smuggling. And the landscape then was very much important to this, and how you could use the landscape and find areas in the landscape that allowed you to successfully land your goods, particularly in remote and secluded areas that was out of the earshot and the eyeshot of those officials who looked to undermine the activity. So seeking links with land and sea and looking to the sources to inform on where they were, and the archaeology to truth in certain places, the actual history and the historical sources that inform that these sites existed. Looking for the invisible, really, because like the careening sites, many of these landing areas and access areas, or coastal access points, as I generically refer to them, are very much invisible in the landscape because they were needed to be to avoid identification at the time. And this again was borne out by studies in the past. In 1935, for instance, by Fuller and Leslie Mandel's study named Pirate Harbours and Their Secrets, probably one of the earliest studies of pirate harbours, when they stated that it so happens that the secrets of even the most important pirate havens are a little better known today than they were when guarded by threat of rope, cutlass and plank, inferring that even at the time of their use, irrespective of the threat by the officials of the time, or the crown of the time, or the government of the time, they were guarded secretly. These secrets and the locations of these sites were guarded because they were so important to the operations. One thing I need to say as a proviso before going further is that a lot of the sites that are coming to the fore within this landscape in the southwest coast would have had multiple uses and multiple users over time. So it's very difficult to say who used them and why they were used specifically. We can infer from the types of sites what the uses may have been, but we can't say for sure. They're certainly notoriously difficult to date, being many of them being rock cut structures. So again, in the absence of archaeological excavation, we can't apply a specific date to them unless there's a specific reference to them being forged in documents which haven't come out yet. They could have had both a legitimate and an illicit usage, of course, as well, used by many for different reasons. And they focused very much on the natural features there, the rocks and the landing places, and many of them are then culturally manipulated in order to fit the box of what they needed to be used for. But again, using the term fit the box, we have to be very careful that we don't try to fit these sites into a certain box to suit a narrative. So rather than saying this is specifically a pirate site, we have to be very careful that we're not too prescribed in what we're applying to our interpretations. Some of these sites then, just using focusing in on some of the harbours in Lemcon, for example, we know that there are recorded sites there, already known archaeological sites like the Battery Tower of William Hull's former domain house and castle. But there are others that went unrecorded, certainly down in the intertidal zone and around the coast there that was previously unrecorded, and inform an extensive maritime archaeological use there. Archaeological sites rather there, maritime infrastructure. Again, local knowledge is key to any study like this, talking to the locals who inform on the location for many of these sites, the place name evidence and even field name evidence that suggest that there could be something within that given landscape. And here we see a set of key steps going down to what is known as Boathouse Field. So no doubt a much larger site was originally located there. The Long Dock, and in keeping with its name, there is indeed the remains or the basal remains of a long dock there, robbed out over the years, and another key structure also robbed out over the years here up at the top right-hand section of the slide. Evidence for a small boat harbour, and also several mooring posts upright on the foreshore showing distinct signs of rope wear. So again, in one very small location, archaeological evidence to suggest fairly substantial marine infrastructure within that one location in Lemcon. Going back to the dating evidence, as I say, very, very difficult to date these sites in the absence of archaeological excavation. But a walkover in the intertidal zone did produce a fragment of a 17th century Tuscan oil jar strap handle. So certainly we can say that there was 17th century trade going on there. But to what period in the 17th century, again, we can't say, because they could straddle the 17th century itself. So very hard to pinpoint to the time of the Pirate Alliance, for instance. So but we can say for sure that there was there was trade to Tuscany at that stage into that area in Italy and Europe. And we know again from the sources that goods were being brought in there directly to Lemcon. Just one example here, Dutch pirate Klaus Campaign brought a whole cargo of goods in 1625 into Lemcon. He was met by William Hull, and there he even lists, this is from the state papers held in the National Archives, a list of the goods that he had on board. And also from the state papers, a separate entry, the names of those who bought the goods off the Pirates campaign at Lemcon. So again, we get a very good insight into the trade that was taking place, who was involved. It informs on a network of traders and carriers waiting on the quaysides in Lemcon to collect the goods, and local infrastructure there by inference must have been in place. So whether the new archaeology in the intertidal zone and on the foreshore of Lemcon dates specifically to this period or indeed earlier or later, we can't say for sure, but what we can say from the sources is that there was certainly infrastructure in place at the time to facilitate the landing of goods. And then more specific sites have come to the fore and come to light while carrying out the surveys in the area around Roaringwater Bay and on its many islands. And again, what I call stairways to the sea. They're rock-cut features, primarily steps, but also at times containing platforms, rock-cut platforms, putlock holes for structures that were erected, and also slipways. And here's an example of one up at the top left-hand corner, the coffin steps on Hare Island. Very wide set of steps going at different angles with platforms in between. And tradition has it that they used to land and bring coffins on and off there, either to collect the dead or offload coffins for collection elsewhere, and hence the name, the coffin steps. Others then in Robert Cove, steps and rock-cut features there you can see going right across the face of the sloping rock. The steps go down to what appears to be a boat naust of some sort or a little boat harbour. And again, this was sent to me by Colin Chambers, who walked over the area there and spotted this very kind of ephemeral set of steps across the face of the sloping rock. And my colleague Carl Brady forwarded me on this image of steps going right down in the lower right-hand corner, left-hand corner there, right down to the actual water in Port Alley in West Waterford, right down to the actual water's edge. So zigzagging down the face of the cliff there to the water's edge, again in a very remote area. So perhaps for the offloading of cargo tied into perhaps smuggling and piracy at a given time. But dating it, we can't say for sure what date this dates to. Others, again, have other affiliations. In St. Finian's Bay in County Kerry, there's this really beautiful set of rock-cut steps and platform in between, and then further steps down right into the water. That could have a potential date right back to the medieval period with St. Finan, perhaps where St. Finian's Bay is associated with the early St. Finan in the area and the early monastic settlements, including that on Skellig Michael. So perhaps these could date as far back as that to the monks coming in and I suppose stepping off and coming on land at this coastal access point. So again, the point is that they may have other associations entirely outside of smuggling and piracy. And again, place name evidence may provide the insights there. But they would certainly have had a long use and can still be used to gain access to the interior from there. Again, Dunmore East here, a nice set of steps right down to the water's edge. Set of steps on the Galtee Islands, which very much tied in with piracy and the pirates of the Galtees. So again, perhaps this steps was used to specifically allow goods to be landed and collected there. And also this one, again, supplied by Carl Brady, my colleague, of Black Castle in Wicklow, very much associated with the nearby castle, Black Castle. So again, by inference, perhaps this is more directly associated with the activities to do with the castle than any other activities. So again, it's making sure we retain a kind of a broad interpretation of these sites. One cove on the Dunmanus Bay side of the peninsula, Amazon Peninsula, is that of Kenty's Cove, and it too has its set of steps, known locally as the Pirate Steps, because Kenty was a known pirate in the early part of the 17th century, in about 1625 to 1629, and associated caves and platforms, again, where he used to bring in, ships would come in and offload goods. So it's really looking at the history of these sites, the sources for these sites, and trying to tie in the activities. It's also looking at, and I'm interested in looking at the actual nature of these sites. Are they high, low, or medium tidal sites, which again would inform the types of boats that could access these. The measurements of the steps themselves and the width. We know the coffin steps was wide for allowing a certain volume of people to go on and off, but the steps, pirate steps in Kenty's Cove, for instance, are just wide enough for one individual to access. So again, what were they used for, and what were they forged specifically for what function? So again, it's looking more broadly at the use of these sites within that landscape. Here on Credon Head, a beautiful set of steps and a platform in between on what is known traditionally as Born the Munna Gurum, or the Road of the Black Women or Black Men, which traditionally has an association with slavery, potentially the offloading of slaves in the 17th and 18th century. But again, it could have had wider functions dating to an earlier period and then was reused for slavery activity at that stage. So there's an associated cave, as you can see, and the routeway from the steps led right in the old routeway to Waterford. But if you look at the top map, the Ordnance Survey map from the 1880s, there's a spring indicated by the blue arrow just on the top of the headland there, at the top of the rise of the 40 steps, as they're referenced on the Ordnance Survey map. And again, these sites may have a very more pragmatic use for mariners, that they were able to allow access in the immediate hinterland to fresh water. So mariners may have just known that these steps existed, or indeed the steps may have been forged to allow access by mariners to fresh water when they needed it. So again, as I highlight, these sites were multifunctional and had multiple users. And these are not unique just to Ireland. Studies of such sites have been undertaken across the globe, dating to very many different periods, right back to the prehistoric period, say from, this is just one example of Christiana Marangu's research into the rock cut features on lemnots in the Greek islands. And again, very much similar, a lot of them, to what we're finding and what have emerged from the southwest coast of Ireland along the west coast and right around to Waterford. These rock cut features and rock cut steps, but also channels for what she is interpreting as potential water management, cisterns, troughs and basins, for instance. And these are, again, evidence on islands like Skellig Michael, where the monks forged out troughs and basins to collect rainwater for fresh water. So again, it's the forging of the landscape into a cultural usage. Again, this place is very much in the prehistoric period associated with piracy. So certainly the pirates that lived on the islands here in Lemnots would have utilised these in the landscape. And again, the movement of people and goods, Marangu has considered the use of these sites for that. Certain sites, though, do smack of particularly of piracy and smuggling by their location and by their makeup. And two sites I would offer that interpretation for in the southwest of Ireland and southwest of Cork particularly. One is this one here on Sleek Head in Crookhaven. Only wide enough, a series of steps down on the rock face, right out on the peninsula there. On the rock face, only wide enough for one individual to go down or go up at any given time. They overhang the sea when you get to the bottom of them, and below them is this cavern. So Presumably a boat could have come in because kayakers can go through the cavern even today. A small boat would come in to collect or offload goods. The site is associated with a promontory fort on that headland. So again, these may be much earlier stone forge sites or rock cut features dating back to potentially the Iron Age or the medieval period, and used at that stage and reused then in the intervening period since. The other site, Dutchman's Cove in Castlehaven, is a unique site to date, but there will certainly be others of them in the landscape. Not just because they have rock cut steps and platforms, but up at the very top in the rock faces, these two lantern niches or light niches where lights could be put in and they would guide the boats in at night time. So again, a site very much hinting at clandestine usage where boats and goods were coming in, or people were coming in on the cover of darkness, so they wouldn't be identified. And we must, I think, start thinking about these as archaeological structures in their own right and recording them as such in the archaeological records, because many of those that are coming to light deserve that actual consideration. It's critical really to record these sites. There are many of them, and I know there are an awful lot more out there that need to be identified, and they can only be so by talking to the locals, walking the coastline, and really looking out for these type of sites in the landscape. And they need to be identified and they need to be added to the archaeological record before they are lost. Not just because they provide evidence for connections between maritime landscapes and seascapes and islandscapes, but also to enable interpretation and re-evaluation of their function by those that were using the maritime areas and the sea at any given period. But they are also very much under threat from a whole series of threats at the moment, including a social threat, the modernisation, for instance, of these locations. We see here, for instance, Badger's Cove in Dunmore East. We have two sets of steps coming down. You see the earlier ones indicated by the blue arrows, but then you see the more modern concrete steps put over part of the right-hand earlier steps there, really to allow continued access to the strand in Badger's Cove. But they're masking the earlier steps and potentially destroying them. Development impacts, particularly with the increase in the focus on coastal tourism, has the potential to seriously impact sites like these that aren't in the archaeological record. And of course, climate change, which is now a huge threat to any of our coastal heritage. Not alone rising sea levels, which would again mask these sites, apart from being accessible to a certain few who are diving, for instance, being then underwater, but also to erosion from memory, because once they're gone, they're gone. And if we don't realise these sites are there, if we don't begin to identify and archaeologically record these sites, then we won't have a memory of what these sites where they were or what they were used for. And a good example here is Bullock Harbour, where in 2018, after Storm Emma, the modern seawall collapsed, and beneath it was revealed these set of rock cut steps. You can see it here indicated by the blue arrow. So it's very much incumbent upon us to look for these types of sites and record them before they are lost. So to conclude, I would say the type of piracy that I'm looking at was specific. It was very much of its time and very much tied into the processes under the Munster plantation and the changes that were taking place and within the wider world at the time. But it also needs to be looked at as a microcosm of what was going on there at the time, not just the piracy, but all users of the maritime landscape of that time, and not just around the south coast, but across the North Atlantic and south across the world. And the pirates of the Alliance and their operations certainly provide a keyhole into a much greater interconnectivity that existed in places like southwest Munster, but also, as I say, across the Atlantic for that period. Certainly the study and my study of that particular period has revealed extensive historical sources, but also cultural markers. including lesser known archaeological sites that, as I say, are very difficult to date or difficult to tie into a specific activity. They are, however, informing on how the maritime landscape that includes the seascapes and the islandscapes, in keeping with the theme of this conference, was used and manipulated, and how they forged that landscape to accommodate those uses that they needed at that point in time, whether for piracy or smuggling or for access to fresh water or for whatever. And it's the interaction and the interrelationships that coexisted in this remote coastal areas, like the southwest coast of Ireland, that is key, and where the land and the sea and the sky acted as interfaces that linked the lives of those living within these maritime worlds. Thank you very much.
Awareness of climate change has grown in recent years, and the impact of increased storm frequency, rainfall, and other symptoms of it are particularly felt on our coastlines. In this, the second presentation in our third session of Land, Sea and Sky, the Archaeology of Coasts and Islands, our two speakers will be addressing the impact on Ireland's coastal archaeological sites. Anthony Corns has been the Technology Manager for the Discovery Programme for the past 20 years, responsible for the management of applied technology research. He has participated in several EU-funded projects and is currently the chairman of the European Career Network and a member of the management board of the Cost Action SEDA, Saving European Archaeology from the Digital Dark Age. Louise Barker is Senior Investigator in Archaeology at the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales and Senior Archaeologist on the CHERISH project. She is primarily involved in the ground survey and investigation of heritage sites along the coasts of Wales and Ireland as part of the cross-border CHERISH team. CHERISH, Climate, Heritage and Environments of Reefs, Islands and Headlands, is a 5-year Ireland-Wales project, bringing together 4 partners across 2 nations: the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales, the Discovery Programme Ireland, Aberystwyth University's Department of Geography and Earth Sciences, and Geological Survey Ireland. This presentation, Understanding Value and Loss at Irish Coastal Heritage Sites, explores achievements from the project so far in terms of Irish sites, including completion of the first stage baseline recording and vulnerability assessment of the archaeological indicator sites, research and development of rapid remote sensing methodologies to identify the full extent of monuments and the historic environment at risk from climate change, outreach and community engagement activities, exploration of wreck survey methodologies, integration of research results within government strategies and policy, and archiving and promotion of project data for wider use and long-term monitoring.
Hello everyone and welcome to this presentation on the CHERISH project, and many thanks to the organisers for the opportunity to give this presentation today and the organisation of this great series of talks. My name is Anthony Corns and I'm the Technology Manager at the Discovery Programme in Ireland, and together with Louise Barker from the Royal Commission of Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales, we will present to you how the activities of the CHERISH project are helping us to understand the value and loss at Irish and Welsh coastal heritage sites. With the advent of climate change due to the impact of human activity on the global climate, there are several climatic conditions which are modelled to change over the coming century. Precipitation is expected to increase by up to 14% in winter times and reduced by up to 20% in summer, potentially causing flood and drought events respectively. Surface air temperature is set to rise by between 1 to nearly 2 degrees. Flood risk will increase during winter with an estimated 20% increase in river and ground water flooding. With increased melting of ice sheets and thermal expansion of seas and oceans, it's estimated that sea level could range from approximately 1/4 of a metre to 6 metres by 2100, depending on our projected production of greenhouse gases. With increased energy in the atmosphere, it is expected that wind speeds will increase in the winter, resulting in more extreme storm events and also wave surges. And finally, it is estimated that global sea temperatures are warming at a rate of 0.5 degree per decade. So with all these changes in climate conditions, what are the effects on our cultural heritage? For our coastal environment, this includes several different areas. We have both the coastal area and also the intertidal area, where due to tidal changes, exposed areas of coastal heritage can be seen. And a lot of these coastal heritage sites include things like forts, promontory forts, also island environments. But also within the CHERISH project, we're also looking at shipwrecks, both submerged and those beached. Climatic change effects of temperature on our coastal heritage sites include the rise in sea levels, which can impact on all aspects of coastal heritage as a result of flooding and storm surges. A rise in sea temperatures also brings the potential for new invasive marine species and pests, which could affect underwater and intertidal heritage such as shipwrecks. These are the examples such as shipworms and things like that. These could also be grey kind of canaries in the coal mines, because these kind of invasive species tend to populate areas of wreck sites earlier than other substrate, so we could potentially use wreck sites as climatic indicators for other aspects. The effects of drought within the coastal heritage area have some maybe positive effects. Potentially we could have the discovery of new heritage sites due to visible parch marks and crop marks in summer times. I know the summer of 2018 was particularly spectacular. However, the drought effects also include the drying out of cliff faces and increasing the risk of destabilisation and collapse, affecting heritage sites on coastal edges. With increased rainfall, the ground has potential to become saturated during the winter time, which increases the risk of flooding, landslides and erosion at heritage sites. So we can see here we have a historic building which could potentially become water damaged due to the flooding, but also we have coastal sites such as the example of Dunbeg, where water saturation and the overlying sediments caused collapse and catastrophic collapse there. With the potential for storms to be more violent and are more frequent during especially the winter and autumn periods. Turbulent seas could damage heritage both on the seabed and foreshore, where we have shipwrecks being moved quite considerable distances and scoured on the seabed floor. With the increased frequency and power of storms in the autumn and winter, these have the potential to breach coastal barriers, leading to potential flooding of archaeological areas and historical areas, which could affect buried archaeological evidence. We've also got a massive potential for erosion and loss at coastal edge areas from wave action, undercutting both rock of hard sediments, but also soft sediment coasts, such as you can see on Dinas Dintley, and also the east coast of Ireland. Storms also have the potential of moving and reshaping sand dune systems. This has the potential of burying archaeological sites, but also exposing hidden heritage sites, such as we've seen on Skara Brae. Storms also have the potential of damaging physical structures, such as upstanding buildings and historical and archaeological structures, just due to the energy of the wind. So we've seen from the last few slides the effect that climate change can have on our coastal heritage sites. So this was the main reason for establishing the CHERISH project. CHERISH stands for Climate, Heritage and Environments of Reefs, Islands and Headlands, and the project has been funded through the Island Wales Programme 2014-2020. And it's receiving approximately €5.1 million worth of project funding through this fund. And it was set up under the specific object 2 within the Island Wales Programme call, which was to increase capacity and knowledge of climate change adaptation for the Irish sea and coastal communities. So within the CHERISH project, there are 4 main aims. Firstly, establish a new coastal baseline data and recording standards. At present, there's no formalised standard way to evaluate what kind of coastal loss is happening at coastal heritage sites, or even accretion is happening. So the main thrust of the project is to develop these new methods, test them, and guide people into using them into the future. Secondly, linking land and sea. It's the idea of closing this concept of the white ribbon. So the white ribbon is an area between the terrestrial area and the marine area where very little information has been collected due to the difficulty of collecting information in this environment. This is more like the intertidal area. So the idea within the CHERISH project is to improve our methodologies to fill a gap within this area. Thirdly, it's understand historic climate and weather through the use of paleoenvironmental methods and looking at the archives to understand how these coastal communities have coped with some of these climatic changes in the past, and can they help us into the future. And four, increase our understanding of sites which potentially be damaged or may disappear. So identify through the project a series of case study sites where we can record in more detail some of these sites and understand their archaeological significance. Within the project, there are 4 partners involved. Ourselves from the Discovery Programme, we're an archaeological research company based in Ireland. And also based in Ireland is the Geological Survey of Ireland, who have provided a lot of the marine survey capabilities within the project, but also the geological and geomorphological understanding of the coastal environment. And in Wales, we have the kind of mirror of this with 2 institutions. So the Royal Commission of Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales, who Louise is from, who will speak a little later on, who are dealing with the kind of cultural heritage aspects of the project within the Wales area. And then there's Aberystwyth University Geography Department, who are dealing a lot with the paleoenvironmental and paleogeography components of the project, and also the erosion and deposition modelling. Together, we all have different skills and competencies we bring to the project. But as we work together as a team, we can share these experiences and methods to develop this approach and improve the way that we understand climate change is affecting our coastal heritage. So one of the main things is within the CHERISH project is this idea of developing a toolkit which will allow us to understand the damage or the effects of climate change on the coastal environment. Firstly, we're approaching this from the air or using aerial methods. So this could include the use of UAVs or drones to survey sites. This provides us with a low cost or kind of off-the-shelf methodologies for monitoring sites, and we've used this quite considerably within the project. So we're using the examples of drones like this DJI Phantom 4 here. And what we would do is, through a series of overlapping imagery, we would use a process called structure for motion, and we're able to model out the terrain underneath it in 3 dimensions to a very high accuracy. So an example down here is Doonbeg Fort down in Kerry, which has been flown several times during the project. And we're using this model to assess the different levels of erosion that's taking place on each of the sites, but also to understand the different archaeological features and topographic features which are evident from the model. Within the aerial approach, we're also using kind of maybe traditional methods, such as using light aircraft, such as the Cessnas, where you physically open the window and using traditional methods of aerial prospection and aerial photography, taking photographs of sites for visual inspection to see if there's any erosion taking place, but again to also identify new archaeological sites. This is one of the aerial photographs taken at Illintannig, down on the Dingle Peninsula in Kerry. But we're also using historical archives or aerial archives to assess, can we detect or use them as a visual reference to see what erosion's taken place. Some of these aerial collections may date back to the 1930s, so they have maybe up to 90 years historical change could have taken place in that time, and that's as a good reference point. Within the aerial toolkits, we're also using new methodologies such as LiDAR, which uses a laser scanner beneath a fixed-wing plane or helicopter, And by using this, you can produce large landscape models or topographic models of landscape regions, which allow you and enable you to identify new archaeological features and map these to much higher accuracy, but also to use them on a coastal monitoring. And also within the use of UAVs, rather than just use the visible spectrum, but start to use what's called multispectral camera systems, which enable us to identify crop marks much earlier than they're perceived by the naked eye due to things like crop stress and using different spectrum within the non-visible range, which allows us to see these features. If we switch now to the terrestrial aspects of our work within the toolkit, there are several methodologies we've been using. These include kind of traditional survey or walkover surveys using things like a GPS system or toll stations. Looking for the tops and bottoms of banks of archaeological features and structures and physically walking over them and mapping them. We've applied the use of terrestrial laser scanning within the project. So this device here records, several hundreds of thousands of points a second to a very high accuracy of approximately about 2 millimeters, resulting in a three-dimensional model of a lot of these archaeological structures, cliff faces, a range of features which would be traditionally quite hard to survey using total stations. And it allows us to produce these audit models of sites at different times and reference them against each other and try and calculate if there's been any significant loss or damage onto these sites over time. Also within the terrestrial, we're not just looking at what's on the surface, but also below surface. So using things like geophysical survey to identify what the archaeological potential is below the surface. So you might find that there's a site here such as Glass Carrig which is being eroded, but we don't really understand what the potential full loss of the archaeology is until we kind of start to view what's below the surface and identify archaeological features which are at the coastal edge. There's also other aspects such as coring, excavation, using abseiling methods to look at cliff faces and look at archaeological features within the cliff face, which are also being used within the project. If we switch to the marine, there are several methods again being used here to interrogate the bathymetry or the seabed and the shipwrecks that exist there. So the GSI have several marine vessels which are being used within the projects, using side scan sonar, multi-beam to kind of map the seabed. Here's just an example of one of the ships, the Manchester Merchant in Kerry. This is a result of bathymetry survey or multi-beam, where the ship goes over and using a series of radar energy pulses, that we can produce a map of the seabed, and it's quite high resolution on some of these ship features. We're also using divers and underwater robotic vehicles to do some photogrammetry and also condition inspections of shipwrecks within the study areas. Within the CHERISH project, there are several project areas both in Ireland and Wales which fall within the funding area. The funding area in Ireland goes from the Shannon, around here in Kerry, all the way up the south coast, up the east coast to the Boyne, and include areas of North Dublin, South Wexford, East Wexford, the Copper Coast along Waterford, and the Dingle and Invera peninsulas in Kerry. And in Wales, it goes from Puffin Island, Anglesey, all the way around to Castleback, and then Dinas Island, Ramsey Island, and all the way around to Castlemartin and Stackpole. Louise will now look at some of the case studies within these regions and present some of the work we've done within the CHERISH project. Thanks, Louise.
Thanks, Anthony. I'm going to look at a number of case studies from CHERISH sites across Wales and Ireland. We'll be looking at a number of different types of environments, from the coast edge through to island landscapes, and also the intertidal and maritime zone. This is Dinistintlle Hill Fort in North Wales. It's a late prehistoric hill fort situated on top of a hill of moraine laid down at the end of the last glaciation some 12,000 years ago. The image clearly shows erosion of the site, and this is coming from numerous pressures, from the sea, which is eroding the base of the cliff face, but also the more active erosion is occurring due to intense and prolonged rainfall, where the ground becomes saturated within the hill fort and water is emerging out of the cliff face at the junctions between the soft and hard sediments, which is causing slumping and cliff collapse. The images here clearly show an example of this that's happened during the monitoring of the hill fort during the lifespan of the CHERISH project. Over the winter of 2019, with intense rainfall, the cliff collapsed around the area of the inner ditch of the hill fort, clearly exposing the feature itself. Part of the work of CHERISH has looked at map regression to try and understand erosion rates at the site. Over the past 120 years, we've estimated that we've lost a maximum of around 55 metres of the monument. And projecting this forward, we're looking at only really having another 200-300 years for the lifespan of this monument. And that's really not taking into consideration the increased and accelerated effects of climate change on it. Over the past 4 years, the CHERISH team has undertaken and commissioned many different phases of work at the site. The most important work initially was the baseline data survey of the monument. We wanted to gather a highly accurate data set from which we can then identify and monitor change going forward. This was undertaken using UAV and also through laser scanning, and so what we've gathered now is a sort of sub 5 centimetre accurate model of the monument. Precision survey of the hill fort to monitor erosion change is obviously very important, but at a site so clearly threatened, it's really crucial that we improve our understanding of it. And we've done that in a number of ways. We've undertaken new analytical earthwork survey of the upstanding remains, and we've also undertaken coring in the wetlands and surrounding the site so that we can reconstruct the past environments of it. We've also commissioned a geophysical survey, 3 different types, magnetometry, resistivity and ground penetrating radar. You can see from the images on the screen that what we've found is quite a densely packed interior to the hill fort, containing numerous roundhouses, evidence of roads and streets running through the hill fort, the access metalled road up to it. We've uncovered what looks to be the buried outer ditch of the fortification, and also to the south of the hill fort in the field not quite shown on this slide, there's evidence also of later prehistoric field systems, but also that of medieval and post-medieval settlement. We've also undertaken more invasive work, two periods of excavation, both in 2019. The ditch section, which was exposed following the winter rains of 2019, really needed to be investigated, and following lots of training, including that of rope access, the CHERISH team actually went over the edge in June 2019. Here we cleared black the section just to really have a look at it, and we found 11 distinct layers of fills relating to a different number of depositional regimes. What's most interesting is that it would appear that the actual ditch itself initially formed as a post-glacial paleochannel, which was then later reused and incorporated into the defensive circuit of the hill fort. 1 month later, in August 2019, we also held a community excavation at the site. This was commissioned by us and undertaken by the Gwynedd Archaeological Trust on our behalf. We excavated 8 trenches, 2 within the hill fort, as you can see on the image here, as close to the edge as was safely possible. And we had 50 volunteers on site and a huge number of visitors, including 400 on our open day. We discovered a wealth of new information about the site. We have a great number of finds which really showcase the site as being occupied in the sort of Middle to Late Iron Age through to the Roman period. But one of the most exciting finds was the discovery of this exceptionally well preserved stone roundhouse, some 13 metres in diameter, with walls some 2.4 metres wide. What was interesting though at the site was the huge amounts of sand that was deposited over the archaeological features. The diggers had to remove, many metres of the deposit. The sand deposits at Denistone Clay are a clear indication of past storm activity. Did extreme weather events such as storms lead to the abandonment of the hill fort? And to answer these questions, we're undertaking luminescence sampling and dating of the sand deposits overlying both the roundhouse structures and also the sequence of sand deposits within the ditch of the cliff face that we excavated. The work is being undertaken by a CHERISH partner at Aberystwyth University, and the results are really going to help us understand more about Holocene storm activity. It provides really valuable data and dating for pre-documentary sources of storm activity, as shown on the quotes on this slide. Moving across the sea to Ireland now, our next case study site is Glascarrig Medieval Settlement in County Wexford. And I'm just going to show you a film that's been produced by the CHERISH team for the Heritage Week in Ireland just recently. Moving now to the intertidal zone, we're just going to look at a couple of CHERISH study sites here. This is the Sunbeam in County Kerry, a site on the west coast of Ireland which is really exposed to the full force of the Atlantic weather. The Sunbeam is a wooden schooner which was built in the 1860s and was driven ashore in a storm and wrecked in January 1904. When CHERISH visited the site in July 2017, we carried out a survey and a 3D record of the shipwreck. At this point, its location was the same as that recorded back in 2014. On a repeat visit to the site in October 2018, nothing was seen at the location of the July 2017 visit, leading to the assumption that either the wreck had been besanded or that it had moved. Following further walking along the coastline, dramatically the site was actually found 2.5 kilometres away. The winter storms of that year had really broken up and moved the shipwreck, really showcasing the importance of carrying out the original survey and record of the monument. Not far from the wreck of the Sunbeam lies the wreck of the SS Manchester Merchant, but this site lies 11 metres under the water on the seabed. The wreck itself was scuttled in 1903 following a fire on board the vessel. As part of CHERISH's 2019 maritime survey, we carried out a multi-beam survey of the wreck site and have been able to compare this to the Infomar 2009 survey datasets. And here you can clearly see the change that has occurred to the vessel. There's up to 0.5 metres of change at the bow and stern of the vessel, and up to 2 metres elevation change in the centre of the wreck, where the ship boilers are breaking down in response to wave and storm action. This really does reinforce the message that even though we don't see this normally, large change is actually occurring on the seabed. Back over in Wales, our intertidal study sites appear to be a lot more stable than those showcased over in Ireland. However, as you'll see at the Warren Beach in Abersoch in Gwynedd on the Llŷn Peninsula, the merit of repeat visits is really, really important. At the Warren, we've been looking at the shipwreck that was first recorded here in 2013, believed to be that of the fossil. It's remained relatively stable in our visits, and you can just see from the images the different levels of sand on the shipwreck. But at every visit, we've actually discovered new archaeology on this beach. In April 2018, peats were exposed towards the back of the beach. Now, this was known about. These are peat deposits that were probably laid down sometime around the Bronze Age period. However, what wasn't known was the evidence of peat cutting found in the peat, but also these animal footprints thought again to date to the Bronze Age. So in that sense, we've then carried out full photogrammetric survey and location of these features. Then in a return visit in September 2018, whilst the peat deposits weren't showing very well at all, what we then did discover was a shipwreck right at low tide, and one that hadn't previously been recorded in the historic environment record for the site. So again, this enabled us to carry out rapid recording. At all of our intertidal sites, we're carrying out beach profiles. We're also taking a note of weather patterns for during the visit and prior to the visit, so that hopefully we can build up an understanding of what is happening at these sites. And going forward with this information, we hope that understanding weather patterns and exposures will enable us and others in the future to prioritise site visits and recording. CHERISH is also looking at island landscapes to improve our understanding of both the archaeology and environments of these islands. They've tended to be less studied than mainland sites, so what we're really doing is updating the record and carrying out things such as rapid coastal zone assessments to look at erosional pressures on the islands. In Wales, the main thing that we've done here is to capture LiDAR for 6 of the Welsh islands. LiDAR is aerial laser scanning, and we've captured data to 25 centimetre resolution, and really it's the first highly accurate 3D data we have for these island sites. The reason for this approach in Wales is that a number of these islands are really fragile environments, both on the ground and for its wildlife, and therefore undertaking other forms of survey, such as UAV survey, walkover survey, really isn't possible. The 6 islands that we've looked at include the Smalls Reef, Puffin Island, Bardsey Island, the Tudwell Islands, and moving down south into Pembrokeshire, Grassholm Island and Ramsey Island that you can see here. We obtained the LiDAR data and have been analysing all of that data using the Real Visualisation Toolbox. And this allows you to move around all of the data, illuminate the data and process it in a variety of ways to hopefully draw out more of the archaeology of the site. This is Bardsey Island off the tip of the Llŷn Peninsula in Gwynedd. Here we've used the LiDAR data to create this archaeological map of the island, really showing the archaeology there, particularly that of all of the ridge and furrow systems, but also archaeology that dates back into prehistory. The focus of our work on Bardsey is this narrow isthmus here, where the most erosion is occurring. At this area, we've undertaken much more detailed recording, from moving from 25 centimetre accuracy to LiDAR, but using the GNSS to record centimetre accuracy of the erosion. And again, we're repeat monitoring that to build up an understanding of the rates of erosion. But what we've also been doing is building on previous work undertaken by researchers on the island, is really to undertake an accurate section recording of the eroding isthmus. We've located a number of Mesolithic flints which we've had analysed and recorded and now returned to the island. But we've also in our section recorded what initially was thought to be a whole series of cremation burials which were eroding out of the site, and we've recovered numerous bits of bone from the site which we've subsequently now had analysed, and it's actually showcased that we're not looking at human cremations, but these were actually animal bones. So what we think we're looking at the site now is more of an occupational site, and we're just waiting for some more dating to come through to help us understand more about that. So I'm going to stop there and really just sum up a few things about what the work that we're doing at CHERISH and what are we producing for the future. So I just want to look at a couple of points on this. Obviously all the data that we've collected is open and freely accessible, and it will be available for researchers and people going forward through deposition in the National Archives of Wales and Ireland. We've obviously also, as you've seen, undertaken accurate baseline data, recording baseline data for future coastal erosion monitoring. We've got new understanding and knowledge about heritage sites at risk, and also we're providing all of this data to the landowners to help them manage and understand their sites much better. All of our work is being fed into at national level to policy documents such as the climate change sector adaptation plans for both Wales and Ireland, and we're also just in the process now of writing best practice guidance documents for how we're recording change in the coastal zone. Amongst all of that is the products that we're producing. We're raising awareness of coastal communities, providing them with a long-term context regarding the dynamic nature of the coast, and actually we're providing them with new digital products about their sites, such as 3D models and digital tours that you can actually go and see on Sketchfab. Thank you on behalf of the CHERISH project, and here at the end is just a few places you can go to find out more about some of our work. Our website is here, as are some of our social media, including the Facebook and Twitter accounts. Every 6 months or so we put out the latest newsletter, and newsletter number 6 is just being published, and if you go to the website you'll be able to download that and read more about the project there. So many thanks.